across this landscape. With steam locomotives, the course of time flows in the opposite direction, at least for a little while. The Cumbres Toltec Scenic Railroad is a steam-powered heritage railroad. We run this route with steam locomotives over the highest mountain pass in operation in this continent.
Did you hear the whistle blowing? Rise up early in the morning. Can't you hear the captain shouting? Oh, died up, blow your
horn. Now we're trying to do something that we have never done before. To restore an entire train set from the 1870s and 1880s, including the steam locomotive and the wooden passenger cars behind it. It's the only project of its scope and of its type that's ever been undertaken in this industry. If we're able to pull this off, it will be the first time this train has traveled across this railroad in about 100 years. I was an industrial archaeologist, and I figured that being in academia would satisfy my need to see and know the past. The accounts of how it was, it just wasn't quite enough.
I'm a fourth-generation railroader, exclusively to this railroad. My great-grandfather, my grandfather, my dad, and myself have all worked here. Most of my career, I've run locomotives that were built in the 1920s. Now, we have this project coming along where we are gonna restore an entire historic train. An 1883 locomotive and its historic consist with it.
We have not run a train set of this era of locomotive and this era of cars on this railroad before like this. When this is all done, you will be able to ride this car over the railroad that it was built for. It's not a recreation. It's not an attempt to figure out what it might have been like. It's a continuation. Locomotive 168 was built in 1883. It was ordered by William Jackson Palmer, who was the founder of the railroad, founder of Colorado Springs. It hauled President Taft in the early 20th century. In 1932, it was retired from service, and it had a significant amount of damage from accidents and wrecks that it had been through.
Me and Stathi began to break down the locomotive. We had to basically strip her down to her bare bones.
Almost everything that you could possibly take apart on that locomotive, we did. The work is incredibly physically difficult.
We had to rebuild safety valves, new steam gauges, air gauges. They don't make parts for her anymore. We have to make all the parts.
You have running gear and rods, crank pins, wheels, axles, pistons, etc. that are withstanding on this locomotive about 31,000 pounds of force for each exhaust beat that you hear. If it's not just so, things can break, blow up, fly off.
There are plenty of dangerous things that can go wrong, worst being explosion.
It takes an awful lot of craft and understanding of the technology to be able to make sure that it's going to be safe.
There's no school for this. It's passed down from generation to generation.
The generation that maintains steam locomotives now, they are the keepers of the flame.
It's my job to make sure that she's ready for her maiden voyage.
Everybody looks at the steam locomotive and says that's the most exciting part of all of this. I'm going to say that these historic wooden passenger cars really are the thing that is even more rare.
You can see that the trim and the finish and everything gets far more opulent.
By the time we got the cars that are part of this, they were in pretty abysmal shape. A lot of the wood was rotten and basically just falling off of the cars.
You can see that none of the window glass remains. The roof was beginning to fail and come in.
One of them had had a fire on the inside of it that had burned, and if you tried to roll them down the track in the condition that they showed up in, they would probably fall apart in the first mile and just become a pile of kindling.
It would be far easier to build a replica than it would be to rehabilitate these cars. But the thing is that then it is not a real thing. When people ride inside this and they put their hand on that piece of the interior, they know that that's a piece of 1878. And thinking about the stories that that piece of wood could tell, you find yourself being able to imagine that the needle of time could point backwards, maybe for just a little bit.
And so to take these cars from basically derelict status and return them to the vehicles that they were, we had to assemble a team.
I've been a carpenter for probably about 47 years. I actually live 300 miles from here. I show up here to work on this rail car because it's in my blood. And working with wood that's probably around 150 years old is very challenging. If you make the wrong cut, you can't go get that piece of wood back again.
When I'm working on these cars, I do think about the history of it. We're carrying on traditions which have been occurring here for over 100 years.
You picture all the people from 150 years ago that put this thing together. And then here today, we're making it work now, 150 years later. There's nothing more awesome than that.
This project has taken about 5 years to get to this point. We're right at the edge of having this complete. 95% done, but the last 5% is where the devil lies.
Finishing on the exteriors and the interiors, paint, seats, lamps, ceilings, etc.
I couldn't think of anybody that I would trust more to be at the throttle of that locomotive than Max.
When they said, you're gonna be the one that gets to run it for the first time, it was a sense of awe. Who knows who the last engineer to touch that throttle was? Getting that honor to get to pull that throttle, it's great pride, especially when you put a lot of work into it.
The intention is to run 74 miles round trip, Antony to Osier and back, through some of the most torturous mountain railroading, going through mountain canyons, tunnels, sharp winding curvatures with completely unproven equipment.
This is its first time out. This is its maiden voyage. Wooden rail cars, they don't run straight. They're very flexible, and there's a lot of curves that we're going to be going through. It's a possibility that some stuff might come loose.
You never know if everything is right until you get it out there. Myself and a couple other guys built the entire brake system. We've done the best we could. We'll see if it works tomorrow.
I don't want anything to break. I want everything to be perfect. We took so much time to put her together.
Absolutely, I'm nervous. Your mind plays over again and again and again all the things that could possibly go wrong. But at the end of the day, nothing makes you ready for it. You just have to do it.
Today is the day. We've been working towards this for 5 years, so now we get to prove it in action.
It's gonna be a heck of a journey.
The 168 hasn't made a run this long since 1935.
We got our locomotive ready and we back up to the cars. And we notice a problem with the air brakes.
The whole day's in jeopardy at that point. If you don't have brakes, you can't go anywhere. We had tested that brake valve completely. We pull it apart and we find that all the oil that was in it had heated up and basically glued all the internals together, so it was not going to function. So we had to clean and test that feed valve as quickly as we possibly could. The pressure's on at that point, and you know you have to do the ethical thing if it's not working right, which is pull the plug. But that's the last thing that you want to have to do. You have the rest of the team looking at you. You don't want to fail all of them.
All good? Yep.
It was a wonderful feeling to see those needles on the gauges move as they were supposed to.
That meant it was time to depart. Cracking her throttle and moving her in the yard for the first time, I couldn't believe it. It was something like in a dream. Hadn't been running almost 100 years, and now we're gonna run her the same route that engineers since the 1880s have been taking.
Sounds great at the head end. The cars are riding wonderfully. There's certainly a feeling of elation, but there was also a lot of worry still.
As I started pulling away, you start to wonder, am I gonna make it for water? We are pushing her harder than what it's been pushed in the last 100 years. We encounter another problem.
We got a stuck check valve on the fireman's side. The problem is when one of those sticks open, it's draining the water out of your boiler.
This is not a good thing to happen. It could make your day end really quick.
If you don't have water in your boiler, boilers blow up.
So I ran up into the cab. The formula, if you are going to get a check valve to reseat itself, is you tap on top of the check valve with a hammer or something, not hard because you don't want to whack the fitting so hard that it shears off and blows off the boiler, because that's completely unsafe. And at the same time, you try to restart the injector that puts water in the boiler. And luckily, we were able to get that check valve to seat.
All right.
And we all looked at each other up there on the locomotive. Every one of us just a sigh of relief. Okay.
Okay, let's go. All aboard!
I get back on the train. Max and Jake back in their positions on the engine. Conductor Evan gets back on the tail end, and we continue. The first place where your mind goes after you have an issue like a stuck check valve and you're draining boiler water is, do we have enough water to even get to the next water stop? These old steam locomotives, they don't carry a whole lot of water with them.
We start to worry about our water that is in the tender. Are we gonna make it to lava to get to our water source?
Because again, if you run out, it's over. Coming into lava, doing our mechanical inspection, finding nothing wrong, being able to take water. At that point, you could start feeling a little bit better about everything.
And a sense of relief came over me. We are gonna make it.
That was really sort of the gatekeeper moment. That's when I started to relax a little bit and say, I think we can make this and this is gonna be okay.
Think about the last passengers that rode in this car. They were new to this country, probably oftentimes. They were immigrants. They were headed west. They didn't know what they were going to find. They didn't know what they were going to see. They must have been as excited to be able to ride this car 150 years ago as I am today.
Blast car here, to smell what it smelled like, to feel what it felt like, to see what it looked like. For me personally, as somebody that's always wanted to experience the past, this is about as close as you're going to get to it. This is the time machine. There's nothing more special, gratifying, or true than this right here. It's difficult to find the words to see something that hasn't been done in, almost a century. It's almost impossible to describe.
My great-grandfather's name was Max Casias, named after him. He used to work in Osier, Colorado as a track foreman. It wasn't common back then of, say, a person of my color to be an engineer. I wonder what words he would have to say, if he'd give a big old hug, that would be something, I would hope that he's pretty dang proud. This will be a milestone that I will carry through my lifetime.
I feel a great sense of pride. Our team has worked so hard on this project. This railroad is a great example of what can happen when everybody works together.
You look at the camaraderie and friendships that we've built. To dream big dreams and be able to achieve it, you look at each other and you realize that you've shared something intense. Human beings are capable of so much. If you're positive, if you work together, you understand why it matters. That's what made this country great. That's what has achieved all the great things that have happened in human history. Not to focus on difference, but to focus on the commonality. And when you can assemble a group of people like that, anything is possible.